Daniel Cross and Clara Hayes thought their secret affair could stay hidden forever, but one stormy night, obsession turned deadly, and a quiet accountant's perfect life exploded into a shocking crime that no one saw coming. Daniel Cross lived in a neighborhood where lawns were trimmed to perfection and every driveway seemed to shine after a weekend wash. To his neighbors, he was the picture of stability, a man whose steady job in accounting and long marriage to Elaine made him almost invisible in his normality. Each morning he left for work at the same time, wore the same navy suits, and returned each evening with a polite wave to anyone outside. Beneath this careful routine, however, a quiet hunger for excitement had begun to stir. The pressure of deadlines at the firm, the unchanging rhythm of domestic life, and a gnawing sense that he was merely moving through days like a machine, made him restless. He found himself staying later at the office, scrolling through his phone long after Elaine had gone to sleep, and imagining a life that carried a sharper edge than the one he knew. That edge appeared one afternoon during a client meeting when he was introduced to Clara Hayes, a young marketing consultant with a quick laugh and a confidence that pulled him in immediately. She was nothing like Elaine, who preferred quiet evenings and careful plans. Clara spoke with a spark that made the air feel charged, and Daniel felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. Their professional conversations soon turned into lingering lunches, and those lunches became evening drinks that stretched far beyond office hours. At first, Daniel convinced himself it was harmless, a friendship built on mutual interests and the thrill of clever conversation. But each time he promised to draw a line, he found himself crossing it. Text messages started to arrive late at night, private jokes filled with warmth, and soon the inevitable happened. The boundary between friendship and something far more dangerous dissolved. Daniel told himself that the affair was a temporary escape, a momentary indulgence that would fade as quickly as it began. He returned home each night with a carefully rehearsed calm, kissing Elaine on the cheek, asking about her day, pretending nothing had changed. But the secret created a split inside him, a quiet tension that followed him everywhere. He became hyper-aware of every detail. The sound of his phone vibrating in his pocket, the way Elaine glanced at him when he smiled at a message, the possibility that a neighbor might notice his late returns. What had begun as a spark of excitement now burned like a quiet fire, threatening to consume the life he had spent years building. Daniel thought he could control it, thought he could keep both worlds separate, but already the first cracks in his perfect image had begun to form, and he could not yet see how deep they would run. The tension between Daniel and Clara grew with every passing week. At first, their secret meetings carried the thrill of danger, a hidden excitement that made Daniel feel alive. But as time went on, that thrill transformed into pressure, a constant reminder of the consequences he had so carefully avoided imagining. Clara began to expect more from him, and the reality of her demands clashed with his desire to preserve the life he had built with Elaine. Every message from her carried an edge now, a subtle reminder that she wanted commitment, that she would no longer wait indefinitely. The secrecy that had once protected him now felt like a trap tightening around his chest. Daniel found himself planning excuses, adjusting schedules, and lying constantly. Even the simplest decisions, whether to answer her call, to text back, to see her for another meeting, felt like navigating a minefield. Daniel's nights became restless. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining what would happen if Elaine discovered the affair. He pictured the shocked expression on her face, the heartbreak, the humiliation, the neighbors' whispers. His mind raced with worst-case scenarios, each more vivid and terrifying than the last. At the same time, he feared Clara's disappointment. She was no longer a passive figure in his secret life. She had become a demand, a force of expectation that he could not ignore. In his mind, the problem seemed unsolvable. He tried to distance himself, to tell her it could not continue, but every attempt was met with resistance. Clara's insistence was steady, her patience dwindling, and Daniel began to feel trapped in a corner of his own making. His fear began to morph into something darker. In quiet moments alone, he imagined a life where the problem simply disappeared, where the threat to his marriage and reputation was gone. These thoughts, which at first seemed impossible, started to appear as a dangerous solution. The man who had once relied on logic and reason now found himself weighing the unimaginable. Daniel's careful life, the neat office, the orderly home, the polite neighborhood was at risk of collapse, and he felt powerless to stop it. Every choice seemed to push him closer to an edge he did not want to see. By the time he went to bed each night, exhaustion was accompanied by a gnawing unease, a sense that something irreversible was quietly taking shape. What had begun as a secret affair now threatened to become a storm, and Daniel was at the center, unable to escape its pull. The shadow of what might come grew longer, and he could feel, in the pit of his stomach, that nothing would ever be the same. The night Daniel decided to meet Clara alone was thick with tension, the kind that presses against your chest and makes the world outside seem distant. Rain hammered against the windows, the sound masking the quiet hum of his thoughts as he drove toward her apartment. Each turn of the steering wheel brought him closer to a decision he could no longer avoid. He told himself it would be a conversation, a final attempt to end the escalating pressure between them. But beneath that rationalization, a darker impulse pulsed, one he tried to suppress but could no longer ignore. The quiet thrill of control had turned into a desperate, dangerous need to protect his life at any cost. Clara greeted him with her usual energy, unaware of the storm inside him. She believed he had come to choose her, to finally step out of the shadows of his double life. As the rain streaked down the windows behind her, she spoke with hope in her eyes, outlining plans and possibilities that had once seemed unattainable. Daniel's pulse quickened as he listened. Every word she spoke reminded him of the trap he had fallen into, the impossible position he now faced. Her voice, once comforting, became the soundtrack of his rising panic. He saw her not as a person, but as a threat to everything he had built. The argument that followed was swift and charged. Clara demanded honesty, demanded a choice, and Daniel's carefully constructed rationalizations crumbled under the weight of reality. The fear and anger that had been simmering for weeks boiled over. In a sudden, shocking moment, he lashed out. The act itself was over almost as soon as it began. Clara fell, and the room, once full of warmth and light, became silent and cold. Daniel stared at the lifeless figure before him, unable to comprehend how quickly everything had shifted. The excitement, the fear, the thrill of secrecy, all of it had evaporated, leaving only the stark reality of what he had done. Time seemed to distort. Minutes stretched, and the sound of rain outside became deafening. He moved mechanically, trying to erase the evidence of his actions. Every step was calculated but frantic, every decision weighed against the panic clawing at him. As he wrapped Claire's body, he realized that there was no going back. The choice he had made would define him forever. The man who had spent years crafting a life of stability and respect had crossed an irreversible line, and the world as he knew it had ended in the span of a single violent night. The shadows of the room seemed to whisper of the consequences yet to come, and Daniel knew he was now alone in a reality that would soon reveal its harshest truths. The night after the unthinkable act, Daniel moved through his home like a man possessed. His mind raced, oscillating between fear, shame, and a cold, calculating focus on what had to be done. Every object, every surface in Claire's apartment seemed to hold a piece of evidence that could betray him. He wiped down counters, discarded items that might bear fingerprints, and carefully gathered anything that suggested he had been there that evening. His hands trembled, but his movements were precise, as if each motion could erase the memory of what had happened. The normal world outside seemed to carry on obliviously, the rain now reduced to a soft drizzle, but Daniel felt trapped in a bubble of dread and urgency. Carrying Clara's body to his car was like walking through a nightmare he could not wake from. The weight of her presence, the reality of what he had done, pressed down on him with every step. He had chosen a remote area from his childhood memories, a place hidden among dense trees and overgrown trails, believing it would conceal the truth from prying eyes. He drove silently, the headlights cutting through the darkness, each mile stretching the tension tighter. Thoughts collided in his head, the consequences if anyone saw him, the possibility of discovery, the life he would lose if the authorities found the truth. Yet beneath it all, a small part of him tried to reassure itself that control was still possible, that the world could remain oblivious to the crime hidden in the woods. The burial itself was hurried but methodical. He dug into the damp earth, the soil clinging to his gloves, and placed Clara beneath the fallen leaves, covering her in a layer of earth that felt simultaneously final and fragile. The act was surreal, mundane in its mechanics, horrifying in its reality. When it was done, Daniel stepped back, staring at the disturbed earth, knowing that beneath it lay the secret he had created. He returned home with the same quiet composure he had shown for years, hiding the storm raging inside. A shower, a change of clothes, A careful glance at the clock before Elaine awoke, everything had to appear normal. In the following days, Daniel moved through life as if nothing had changed. He attended work, answered emails, and smiled politely at neighbors. Yet the shadow of what he had done lingered behind him, invisible to the outside world, but inescapable to him. Each sound, each notification, each unexpected knock at the door carried the threat of exposure. He was living in two worlds. One, the familiar rhythm of home and work, and the other, a secret buried beneath the earth, a silent accusation that would not allow him peace. The balance was fragile, and Daniel knew that it could shatter at any moment, leaving him exposed and powerless against the consequences of a single, irreversible act. For weeks, the disappearance of Clara Hayes baffled everyone who knew her. Friends called her apartment repeatedly, growing increasingly worried when she failed to answer. Her colleagues filed reports, the police opened inquiries, and the media began circulating her story as a missing person. Daniel maintained a calm exterior, attending work as usual, responding to questions with careful words, and offering sympathy to those who worried about Clara. Each interaction was a performance, a delicate balance between concern and detachment, designed to divert suspicion, but the tension inside him continued to grow, gnawing at the edges of his composure. Small cracks began to appear almost immediately. Surveillance cameras near Clara's apartment captured Daniel's car on the night of her disappearance. A few neighbors remembered seeing him enter the building under the cover of rain. Investigators noticed inconsistencies in his statements, slight hesitations, vague details, and discrepancies that, while minor, raised enough concern to keep him under scrutiny. As the investigation intensified, Daniel's carefully constructed world began to unravel. He found himself retracing his steps obsessively, imagining what detectives might find and how they could connect him to Clara's disappearance. His nights were sleepless, haunted by shadows and by the memory of her lifeless body. The police began to focus on him, piecing together evidence that pointed in his direction. Soil from his car matched samples from the remote woodland where Clara had been buried. Witness statements and traffic footage created a timeline that placed him near her apartment at critical times. Each new discovery tightened the noose around him. Despite his attempts at rationalization, the reality was undeniable. He could not hide forever. The quiet accountant, once admired for his methodical approach to life, was now cornered by the consequences of his own actions. Eventually, the pressure became too great. Confronted by detectives with the mounting evidence, Daniel's composure cracked. Every denial faltered, every explanation fell apart under scrutiny. In a moment of surrender, he confessed to the murder and the cover-up, detailing the events of that rainy night and the steps he had taken to conceal the crime. The confession shocked the community, turning whispers into headlines and revealing the dark truth behind a seemingly perfect life. Daniel's arrest marked the end of the carefully maintained facade he had built over years. His family, friends, and neighbors were left grappling with disbelief and betrayal. The affair that had started as a secret thrill had escalated into a deadly mistake, leaving a trail of devastation. What began as a quiet, hidden desire ended as a chilling reminder of how obsession, fear, and desperation can drive a person to commit acts they could never take back. The life he once controlled had collapsed entirely, replaced by the consequences of a single irreversible choice, forever marking his name in infamy.